Hi everyone, this is Daniel Tekunoff. I'd like to present to you how James Madison covered up a key defect in the U.S. Constitution. Many people do not realize that James Madison's notes of the Constitutional Convention were not released until after his death. The 1787 Constitutional Convention had a strict rule of secrecy. At the end of the convention, they voted to keep the journal and the individual members' notes secret, with the intent that they would someday be made public. When we review the record, it appears very clearly that James Madison hid the defect in the Article 5 Convention Clause by refusing to make his notes public until after his death. The records of the Journal of the Constitutional Convention were given to George Washington at the end of the convention. He deposited them in 1796 with the Department of State, and there they stayed until in 1818 Congress ordered them to be made public and then printed. President James Monroe asked Secretary of State John Quincy Adams to head the project. Adams found the records disorganized, but was able to collate them by date. The last page contained the entire record of the last 2 workdays, some 12 to 14 hours of work, all crossed out except for 5 lines. This is clear evidence the delegates were rushing at the end of the Constitutional Convention, to the point that the Secretary could not keep up. Let's look at the evidence. Here is the passage out of Volume 1 of Eliot's Debates, page 123. The volume containing the Journal of the Convention was in an incomplete state. The Journal of Friday, September 14, and a commencement of that of Saturday, September 15, filled 3/4 of the 153rd page, then terminated abruptly and were, with the exception of 5 lines, crossed out with a pen. President Madison, to whom application for that purpose was made, has furnished, from his own minutes, the means of completing the journal as now published. Then, in the introduction to Farron's records, which came out in 1911, we find this piece of evidence. Madison furnished the means of completing the records of the last 4 days. Yale professor Max Farron pored over Madison's notes in preparing the records of the Federal Convention of 1787. And in those records, we find that Madison actually went through his entire records and corrected them when he was reviewing the journal. Farron's records also teach us that Mr. Yates' notes, Robert Yates, the late Chief Justice of New York, his notes came out in 1821. And even though Madison criticized Yates' notes for inaccuracy, Madison also used Yates' notes to correct his own notes in over 50 instances. In the process of helping Adams, Madison would have reviewed not only his notes from September 14 and 15 of 1787, but he would have gone back a few days and clearly have seen the controversial September 10, September 87, and that would have caused him to think more about whether he should release his notes in public. In the process of helping Adams, Madison would have refreshed his memory of George Mason's warnings to the Constitutional Convention about a corrupt government preventing amendments. That would have been found right there on September 15 of 1787. He also would have remembered the beginning of the convention, where the need to have the ability to amend the government without the government having an ability to get in the way was actually stated by George Mason on the record first, after there was a challenge for the need for that. Madison ended up providing Adams only with the information about the motions and votes, so that Adams could make his journal complete. However, Madison kept secret his own warnings as well as George Mason's warnings. Madison would have helped Adams in the 1818 to 1819 range. Just a couple years later, we find in Volume 3 of Farron's records a letter from Madison saying he thinks it's still an early season. In other words, he thought it was still a danger to release his notes, and he planned to release them and published them after his death. When you consider the history of the fight for the Bill of Rights in Congress to avoid a second General Convention, Madison must have focused on his warnings, George Mason's warnings, read the Article 5 Convention clause again, understood that there was a major problem there, and he chose to cover it up. For further study, I invite you to take a look at my book, Guide to the First Article 5 Convention of the People.